You made your point. But did it have to be so public? That was the first thing my father said to me, 3 days after I stood in front of a city full of strangers and told the truth they spent years pretending didn't exist. No apology, no acknowledgement, just quiet humiliation for being called out. What happened before that moment? And what came after? That's where the story begins. Before we dive in, let me know. What time are you listening to this and where are you? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. The chandeliers above cast a soft golden light across the ballroom, shimmering on wine glasses and polished silverware. From where I sat, near the double doors, beside the coat rack and a potted palm, I could see everything, yet no one seemed to see me. The jazz band drifted through something slow and smooth, and every note needled the same message. I didn't belong. I hadn't been invited to sit with the family. My place card read Table 12, the last one before the kitchen doors. It was the kind of table meant for distant relatives or reluctant plus ones. From there, I watched my parents float through the room, greeting guests, hugging friends, laughing with ease. The room froze when my father rose to speak. He tapped his glass with the side of a fork, the metallic clink slicing through the hum of conversation. "I'd like to make a toast," he began, voice warm, practiced, to our younger daughter, graceful, focused, and kind. She always stayed on the right path. No detours, no shame. We're proud to call her ours. Chairs shifted, glasses raised, applause followed. Some people turned toward my sister and clapped harder. Others simply smiled politely and took another sip of champagne. No eyes landed on me. My hand tightened around the stem of my wine glass. Blinking stalled and breath snagged in my throat. The words landed like soft grenades, quiet but devastating. No detours, no shame. Everyone knew what that meant and who it was about. I brought the glass to my lips, but I couldn't drink. My throat had locked. I set it down slowly, carefully, as if any sudden movement might expose how much it stung. The photographer moved through the crowd, angling for the perfect shot of the family. I caught my mother tugging my sister's sleeve to straighten it. My father adjusted his tie. The smiles were flawless, like a magazine cover. I wasn't asked to join. I wasn't even acknowledged. The chair beside me remained unclaimed. I caught my father's gaze from across the room. For a heartbeat, I thought he might nod, maybe offer a gesture, something. I tilted my head slightly, a small automatic reflex, a peace offering. But before my mouth could lift, his gaze slid past me, and the applause crashed back into my ears as I sat frozen in the chair beside the empty one. My fingers still tapped against the untouched glass when it hit me. The head table held no seat for me. That table, the one draped in white satin, glittering with crystal centerpieces and perfectly aligned cutlery, had never been meant for someone like me. Not at birthdays, not during holidays, not even when I came home from Afghanistan with a stitched-up shoulder and a mind full of static. I had learned early on, my place in the family was somewhere on the edge, just close enough to wave, never close enough to belong. I joined the Marines when I was 17. Nobody tried to stop me, and nobody asked why. My mother signed the papers with a tight-lipped frown. My father said, "At least she'll finally learn discipline." Charlotte cried for a week. She said she didn't want me to leave, but she stayed. She always remained. And by doing so, she became everything they wanted: soft, predictable, safe. I came back altered, sunburned, heavier-footed, quieter. I never talked about the bad nights or the men we couldn't save. I learned to keep it all folded inside. Once during Thanksgiving dinner, when I mentioned a friend who'd lost a leg in Kandahar, my father looked up from his plate and said, "Must have been a hell of a thing." Past the gravy, I got married young to someone who couldn't understand silence and left when I realized I'd stopped understanding myself. Divorce didn't shock my parents. It confirmed their expectations. My mother didn't call. She texted days later, "You'll bounce back. Just don't make it dramatic." So no, I wasn't surprised when I got the message the night before the engagement party. It was short, efficient. "Please don't wear white. Thanks, I hadn't planned to." At table 12, I picked at cold asparagus and dry chicken breast, watching the blur of toasts, laughter, and perfectly timed applause. My sister looked radiant, because she was. She had a way of existing that made people comfortable, like a well-made bed in a well-lit room, and I was more like a locked drawer, sturdy but hard to access. 2 seats down sat a man in full dress uniform, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, polished. He neither laughed much nor lifted his glass with everyone else. He studied the room like someone who had seen more than most, and he saw me. When the photographer called the family forward, everyone rose and practiced choreography. I remained seated, too used to being left out to even flinch. That's when he leaned slightly toward me, not invasive, just enough to cross the invisible space that usually kept others away. "You served, didn't you?" he asked, voice low but unmistakably firm. I hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, Marines." He gave a single approving nod. "Thought so." We didn't speak further, but right then something shifted. He wasn't trying to make me explain myself. He didn't ask what I did, where I was stationed, or whether I still had nightmares. He simply saw something in me and named it. At last that evening, I didn't seem like a ghost to myself. Eventually, I drifted toward the far end of the hall, where a screen displayed family photos in a rotating slideshow. Christmas mornings, beach vacations, Charlotte's graduation, and now tonight's portraits. I stopped when I saw the fresh photo of the entire family standing in front of the floral arch. My parents, Charlotte, her fiancé, everyone but me. A woman next to me, blonde, overdressed, probably someone's cousin, tilted her head. "Why isn't the older daughter in the picture?" she asked aloud, more curious than accusatory. I didn't have time to respond. Behind us, my mother's voice slid in like a cold breeze. "Some things don't belong in the frame." The woman gave an awkward chuckle and stepped away. I stayed, staring. Not because I didn't believe what I'd heard, but because I absolutely did. I neither spoke nor moved, and the tears didn't come. I walked outside instead, toward the balcony overlooking the coastline. The ocean shimmered under the night sky. No breeze, only salt in the air and a hush that settled like weight across my shoulders. I gripped the railing, knuckles pale, and let the weight of it all settle into my bones. From behind the glass doors, the sound of clinking glasses rose again, bright and hollow, like nails tapping a lid shut. I carried that brittle sound with me into the next evening, when the hostess led me through another set of glass doors and toward a cramped corner table. The scent of buttered rolls and grilled pineapple drifted past as I brushed against the linen-draped chairs. This was Mission Bay's polished seafood place, quietly expensive, the kind my sister adored. We were told this would be a private dinner, immediate family and a few close friends. A small celebration before the wedding weekend picked up speed. Just us, they'd said. I arrived on time, walked in wearing a navy dress I knew they couldn't fault, modest, pressed, unoffending. Still, the hostess blinked twice when I gave her my name. She glanced down at the seating chart and ran her finger along the list. "Oh," she said, brows knitting slightly, "your guest, seat 11. She didn't offer a last name, just pointed toward the far end of the room, near the swinging doors where waitstaff disappeared and reappeared with trays. She handed me a place card. It was handwritten, unlike the others, and slightly smeared as if someone had rushed to scribble it at the last moment. "Guest, seat 11. I walked slowly past the long family table, set under a chandelier that shimmered gold onto crystal and white linens. My parents were already seated chatting with the groom's parents. My sister looked ethereal again, laughter suspended like light around her. She didn't see me or didn't look. Table 11 sat cramped between the server station and a rolling tray of silverware. The chairs didn't match. My plate was missing a napkin. Around me sat 3 children and a teenage babysitter who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. The kids were already arguing over who got the bread roll with the most sesame seeds. I settled into the chair as the legs squeaked against the floor, but no heads turned. From here, I could see the entire celebration unfolding like a well-rehearsed play. Glasses raised, napkins dabbed at lips. My father stood for another toast. I couldn't make out the speech, but I didn't need to. More praises and thank yous that never reached me. When the appetizers arrived, the waiter hesitated as he set down the plates. "This is, the kids' menu, right?" he asked with a wince. "I guess so," I replied, offering nothing else. He moved on. One of the boys poked his fish sticks with a fork and wrinkled his nose. "Do I have to eat this?" he whined. The babysitter shrugged. "Just eat the fries." I picked up my water glass, trying to steady my hand, but the rim clinked against the glass plate as I set it down again. My fingers tingled, not from anger, but from the pressure of keeping it all inside. I wanted to leave, or shout, or laugh. Instead, I stayed still. Charlotte's fiancé wandered over briefly, likely sent on a goodwill mission. He smiled awkwardly. "Hey, are you okay here? I mean, do you want me to see if there's a mix-up or something?" I gave him a look, tired, not unkind. "It's fine." He bobbed his head and drifted back to the adults who spoke his language. Smooth, effortless, belonging. I watched a boy at the next table swing his legs beneath his chair. He was maybe 9, dressed in a button-down shirt too big for his shoulders. A plate of grilled salmon and green beans sat untouched in front of him while he quietly hummed to himself, tracing the condensation on his water glass with one finger. I stood, walked over, and without asking, placed my place card in front of his seat. "Seems like you belong here more than I do," I said, guiding him gently by the shoulder back to my spot. He grinned and didn't question it. The babysitter barely noticed. I sat in his chair, adjusted the silverware, then folded my original card, first in half, then again until it was a small, stiff square. I slid it into my coat pocket. It scratched against the lining like a secret no one wanted but couldn't throw away. My mother passed close and murmured just above my shoulder, "Let's not make a scene, sweetheart." "This isn't about you." She smiled as if she'd just offered a favor, then walked on. I studied the wine glass in front of me, half full, still untouched. The conversation at the main table swelled again. Soft laughter, silverware clinking delicately against porcelain. From my table, the surf beyond the windows pushed at the shore and drew back again, steady and relentless. He found me outside, standing near the valet stand, pretending to scroll through my phone while the night wind tangled itself in my hair. My family was still inside, laughing, toasting, rearranging themselves for yet another round of pictures. I hadn't realized someone had followed me out until he cleared his throat. "I know a place with stronger coffee than the stuff they're serving inside," he said. I looked up. Colonel Ray. His name tag still clipped neatly to the front of his dress blues, though his jacket was now slung over his arm. He wasn't smiling exactly, but his tone was kind, measured. I weighed it, then gave a short nod. The cafe he led me to sat 2 blocks down, tucked beneath a worn green awning and strung with amber lights that glowed like fireflies against the dark. Inside, the air smelled of roasted beans and baked cinnamon. It was nearly empty, save for a young couple whispering in the corner and a barista restocking cups. We sat at a small table near the window. I kept my coat on, fingers loosely folded in my lap. He ordered 2 black coffees without asking what I wanted, and I appreciated that. I didn't want to make one more decision that night. When the mugs arrived, he didn't touch his immediately. He wrapped his hands around the warm ceramic and watched the street. "My son was supposed to be a lawyer," he said, not as an opening, but more like a line he'd rehearsed. "He was brilliant, quiet, sensitive, everything I wasn't. I spent years trying to make him tougher, pushed him towards sports, structure, hard lines. He folded inward the more I pressed, and then one day he stopped showing up altogether. I said nothing. He didn't need comfort, he needed space. He finally sipped his coffee, then turned toward me. "I recognized your name," he said. "A few years back there was a piece in the Times about a corporal who pulled 2 men out of a burning Humvee near Kabul, saved their lives, 3rd-degree burns on her arms, refused a medal." My throat tightened. I studied the swirl of steam rising from my cup. "I cut that article out," he continued, "kept it in a drawer. Thought, maybe someday I'd show it to my son to prove there are all kinds of strength." The quiet between us wasn't awkward. It stretched, as if something honest had room. "No one mentioned it," I told him. "At the party, no one has ever asked." He nodded, slow and steady. "Families get good at rewriting history." Makes it easier to sleep at night, I traced the rim of my cup with one finger. The ceramic was warm, smooth, real. It grounded me more than anything had all evening. He leaned back slightly, his voice quieter now. "You didn't survive war to be erased by a dinner party." That line, simple, sharp, cut through me faster than any uniformed salute or polite toast ever could. I laughed. Not loud, just a soft breath through my nose that escaped before I could stop it. It was the first real sound I'd made all day. I lifted my eyes and noticed he wasn't smiling, but something softer lived behind his eyes. Recognition, maybe, or regret. "My dad," I said, "used to brag about my deployments to his golf buddies, but only when I wasn't around, as if I was a trophy he didn't actually want on display." Ray didn't respond immediately. He just reached across the table, not to touch, but to tilt his coffee slightly toward mine in a quiet gesture. One that, this time, didn't go unanswered. I lifted my cup and let it meet his with a gentle tap. It wasn't ceremonial, it wasn't loud, but it was mine. Outside, the tide could be heard faintly beyond the buildings, brushing against the shore like it had somewhere to be. I sat back in my chair, the cup still warm in my hands, and let the calm take hold. Then the barista dimmed the light slightly, and I noticed my reflection in the glass, clear, centered, unflinching. That reflection trailed me into my mother's house the next evening. Her place was a shrine to control. Clean lines, muted colors, not a single photograph out of place. The walls carried the faint sting of lemon polish mixed with a drier note, like old paper or air pressed too long into wallpaper. Each time I crossed that threshold, I moved like a guest in a home that used to be mine. That evening, the table had been set with her usual precision. Pressed linens, matching china, silver forks laid out like soldiers on parade. I was told it would be just family. No fuss, casual. But nothing about this house ever felt casual. I came in with a small bottle of red, not expecting notice, let alone thanks. Nobody bothered. Dinner had already begun by the time I found my seat, at the far end of the table, naturally. Not quite banished, but far enough away that I'd have to raise my voice to join the conversation. I didn't bother. Charlotte sat on the opposite side, glowing the way brides-to-be always seem to. Her lavender sweater hugged her shoulders delicately, and her nails were painted the soft pink of someone who had never scrubbed blood out of her own clothes. She beamed often, mostly at her fiancé, who was charming in a way that didn't feel rehearsed. He didn't belong in this house either, but in the way golden retrievers don't belong in museums. Too kind, too open. The roast beef smelled perfect. Mom always cooked well when she had guests to impress. The centerpiece was a low, tasteful arrangement of ivory roses and eucalyptus. A single photo frame stood beside the butter dish, a recent family portrait. Charlotte's engagement shoot, likely. Everyone dressed in pastels, laughing near the water, everyone but me. I poured myself a glass of wine, certain I'd want it. We made it to the second course before Dad decided to hold court. He carved a slice of roast and, without even glancing my way, said, "Remember when she came back from Afghanistan and thought she could fix the world with community college and a divorce?" A thin ripple of chuckles followed. Someone cleared their throat. My mother smiled. I kept my fork in hand, poised above the potatoes, but I didn't take the bite. My stomach had turned to stone. Dad chuckled again. "She wanted to start a nonprofit for vets, remember?" Tried to throw a fundraiser at a dive bar. 2 guys got into a fight, and the police had to shut it down. You can't write comedy that good. This time, the laughter came easier. Charlotte's fiancé let out a low chuckle, probably unsure if it was appropriate, but following the room's lead. I placed my fork down slowly. My hands went cold, even with the wine in my system. Then Mom added casually, as if finishing a thought, "You always took everything so personally. That's why nothing ever worked out. The line that always lands arrived." A hush spread down the table like a crack in glass. No one said anything, and I knew better than to fill it. I lifted my water, the glass slick with condensation, and drank to keep my breath steady. My fingers trembled just enough to make the ice clink. Charlotte glanced at me, just briefly. A flash of something, pity maybe, or hesitation. She looked down again, and then, as if she'd been waiting for her cue, she said softly, "Maybe it's better if you don't come to the wedding party next month. It's not about you, I just think it might be simpler." Simpler. I didn't know what that meant, that my name would make people uncomfortable, that my face in the photos might make someone ask too many questions. The hum of the room dulled. All the noise receded, replaced by a ringing in my ears that came and went like waves. I looked around and realized no one was going to intervene. No one was going to say, "That's too far." The photo on the table caught my eye again. Their smiles, perfect. Their posture, relaxed. There was no space left in that frame for anyone else, especially not someone like me. I rose, pushed back my chair, and several heads turned. "I left a war zone," I said, not raising my voice, not whispering either, and walked into a curated one. No one stopped me as I walked down the hall. The floorboards didn't creak. The air was too still, like the house itself had exhaled, relieved I was gone. The Airbnb I booked last minute was above a surf shop, wedged between a taco stand and a bike rental kiosk. The stairs creaked on the way up and the front door stuck if you didn't jiggle the key just right. Inside, it smelled faintly of sunscreen, lemon cleaner, and a trace of mildew that came with salt air and cheap construction. But it was quiet. Anonymous. Mine. I didn't bother turning on the TV. I dropped my keys on the small table near the entryway, kicked off my shoes, and paused in the center of the room. The overhead light buzzed slightly. A ceiling fan spun slowly above the bed, which was covered in a faded quilt patterned with lighthouses. Everything about the space read as borrowed, a place made to pass through, not stay in. I unzipped my suitcase and pulled out a sweater I hadn't worn, then reached for the hidden flap beneath the lining. The envelope was still there, tucked into the side pocket I rarely used. I pulled it out slowly as if it could sting. The paper was heavier than I remembered, smooth and official. A blue seal stamped in the upper left corner, my name centered across the front. Not "to the family of" or "to whom it may concern." Just my name, clean, final. I still hadn't broken the seal. A few weeks back, I got an email about it. I'd skimmed the subject line. Something about selection, veteran leadership, regional representation, and then marked it unread. The envelope had arrived shortly after, but I didn't tear it open. I packed it into my bag before flying out for Charlotte's engagement weekend, thinking maybe I'd find the right time to share it. But time had a way of slipping past me in rooms where I didn't belong. I perched at the edge of the bed, turning the envelope over in my hands. Outside, the ocean roared, and a rising wind shouldered the windows. Waves crashed somewhere out there in the dark, regular and unforgiving. I stared at the wall across from me, painted a pale teal that tried to be calming but only reminded me of hospital waiting rooms. My fingers hovered over the envelope's seal. I thought about the fundraiser I tried to launch 2 years ago for female veterans who came home with stories no one wanted to hear. The press never covered it. The donors dropped off. My parents told me it was too niche, and my sister said maybe I should focus on getting a more stable job first. I'd shelved the idea quietly, like so many others. The letter changed the math. It came from people who had seen my file, my medical discharge, my training records. They knew everything. The burns, the deployments, the late nights in recovery, and they still chose me. Not out of pity, not out of guilt. They called it merit. They were inviting me to be the regional representative for the National Veterans Recovery Initiative. Public outreach, policy work, storytelling. I'd speak for those still trying to step back into the world without breaking it, or themselves. I hadn't told anyone, not because I was afraid they'd diminish it, but because I wasn't sure I wouldn't do that myself. I set the envelope on the small kitchen counter and studied it, arms crossed. The air in the room felt tight, like it was holding its breath. All these years, I thought if I could just get my family to acknowledge what I'd done, who I'd become, I'd finally settle inside myself. That if my father shook my hand instead of mocking my detours, or if my mother printed a photo with me in it, or if Charlotte said my name with something like pride, I'd finally stop needing to prove I existed. But they hadn't. They didn't. And I wasn't sure they ever would. The envelope didn't change that. It simply existed, like the ocean outside, constant and real. I folded the envelope once, carefully lining the edges, then again pressing down the seam with the side of my thumb. I didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, I slid it into the back pocket of my journal, the same one I used to write in during deployments. It fit snugly, like it had always belonged there. The wind rattled the window panes lightly. Somewhere in the distance, a gull called. Once, then disappeared into the night. The ocean kept crashing, steady as breath. The envelope rested in my lap, edges pressed sharp against my palms. My hand still carried the crease of that envelope when I pushed open the doors of the community center. The air inside smelled faintly of varnished wood and floor cleaner, the kind of sterile scent that clung to public buildings, trying too hard to feel welcoming. A line of folding chairs faced a wall of photographs, each one spotlighted in a way that made them feel like altars. The lighting was soft, reverent. Voices around me were hushed, drifting like smoke across the open space. I hadn't meant to linger. I came after seeing a flyer in the coffee shop window. Through Their Eyes, a portrait series, honoring local veterans. At the bottom, in smaller print, it listed a name I hadn't said aloud in years. Sergeant Matthew Ellis, Matt. The last time I saw him, we were standing ankle-deep in ash, radio static buzzing in our ears. That night had stayed with me longer than most, the smoke, the scream, the impossible heat, and his voice later, after everything. You came back for me. I drifted past a row of framed images, each one paired with a caption or a story. Some were posed portraits, others candid moments. Laughter, stillness, resilience caught mid-breath. There he was. His photograph sat lower on the wall than I expected, almost eye level. He wore his uniform, clean lines, and tired eyes. A flag hung blurred in the background. Beneath it, a quote from his journal, "She pulled me out of fire once." Not metaphorical, real fire. The room tilted and my breathing stalled. I reached out instinctively and steadied myself on the edge of the frame, fingertips grazing the cool glass. No one in my family had ever asked me about that mission. No one had even known his name. And yet, here he was, testifying to a version of me they'd never bothered to meet. I kept my place longer than I intended. A voice cut in beside me. "You're in the next room." I turned. The man looked familiar, older than I remembered, but something about the way he stood, how his shoulders curved slightly forward, triggered recognition. "Ryan?" He smiled. "Didn't expect to see you here?" We shook hands, the grip holding a beat too long, built on shared history and too many things unspoken. He tilted his head toward the adjoining gallery. They're honoring you next week. Veterans Appreciation. You're the closing keynote. I steadied my gaze. They must have made a mistake. They didn't. His voice softened. You should speak. People need to hear your story. I stared at the floor, except the people who matter most. Ryan didn't argue. He just lifted his hand and pointed behind me. There, centered on the largest wall in the gallery, was a photo I hadn't seen in years. Me, in uniform, standing on the side of a road somewhere outside Kabul, dust coating my boots, my face half in shadow, half in sun, and underneath a caption, Corporal H- Operation Sentinel 2009, photo courtesy of SGT Ellis. I stayed rooted to the spot. For years, I had assumed I'd disappeared from the world that mattered, that the only stories worth telling were the ones other people had edited, approved, softened. But this was sharp. This was real. I turned back to Ryan. I don't even know what I'd say. He shrugged. Say the thing only you can. Afterward, I found the event organizer near the reception table. She was startled when I introduced myself, then smiled with a kind of quiet relief. We weren't sure you'd come. Your email bounced. I gave her my updated contact info and nodded when she asked if I was willing to speak. And then I asked for 4 extra seats. She raised an eyebrow. Family, I said. She nodded. As I walked toward the exit, I passed the photo of Matt again. I could almost hear his laugh rise up, the way he did when we both thought we were invincible. I pushed the door open, the hinges sighing as the afternoon light spilled across my shoes. My eyes adjusted as I stepped inside City Hall's main auditorium. The air smelled faintly of floor wax and paper programs, rows of chairs stretched in neat lines beneath high ceilings, trimmed with faded gold. Flags from every branch of service lined the back wall, swaying slightly from the breeze that slipped in each time the main doors opened. A podium stood at the center of the stage, framed by simple lighting and a long table where plaques and framed certificates waited for distribution. I stood backstage, listening to the soft murmur of the crowd. It was full. Over 200 people. Local veterans, families, elected officials, a few kids in scout uniforms. I saw the mayor's assistant cross the front row, handing out printed programs, and someone from the press adjusting a tripod near the aisle. I spotted them in row 3. My parents. Middle seats. My father sat rigid, his hands clasped over one knee, eyes fixed on the stage. My mother wore a pale blouse with a string of pearls, her expression unreadable. Neither spoke, neither looked around. They were present, in body, if not in heart. Charlotte wasn't there. The program had me listed second to last, just before the closing presentation. I was handed a microphone and quietly directed to the stairs at stage left. As the speaker ahead of me wrapped up his remarks, something about bravery and sacrifice, I stepped into the wings, heart steady but heavy. My boots echoed faintly against the wood as I approached the podium. The light hit like a wall, bright, focused, washing out the audience in front of me. At first, the lights washed the faces into shadow. I took a breath, gripped both sides of the lectern, and began. When I came home from my last deployment, no one clapped. Faces lifted across the first rows. I stepped off a plane in California alone, carrying a duffel bag that still smelled like burnt sand. There were no signs, no flags, no familiar faces waiting. I thought maybe I didn't deserve it. Maybe I hadn't done enough. Maybe the quiet was what I'd earned. I let the words hang in the light. But I was wrong. The rows stirred, chair legs scraped, and a throat cleared. I served for 8 years. I deployed twice. I carried people to safety and zipped up bags when we couldn't save them. I came back changed. I tried to explain that change to my family, but silence always swallowed the conversation before it started. I swept the audience and took in the rows. I could make out silhouettes now, some leaning forward, others frozen. I struggled with nightmares with the guilt of surviving. I tried therapy, I tried prayer, I tried pretending I was fine. For a while, that worked. Until it didn't, my voice didn't waver, but my hands clenched tighter on the podium. There was a day, hot, chaotic, full of smoke, when I pulled a teammate out of a burning vehicle. Third-degree burns across my arms. I never told my family. I assumed they wouldn't want to know, or worse, they'd say nothing at all. A ripple moved through the audience. I've carried that silence for years. Not just theirs, mine too. I told myself staying small would keep the peace, that if I didn't ask to be seen, I wouldn't be disappointed. I left a beat. My family thought silence was safer than pride, but today, I'm done borrowing worth from people who never looked. That last sentence hit the room like a dropped stone in still water. The applause held back. The hush turned heavy and electric. In the second row, a man rose. Colonel Ray. He clapped once. Slow, deliberate. The sound rang out across the space, and then another person joined, and another. The room rose in waves until everyone stood. The applause rolled forward, not loud, not frenzied, just full, complete. I stepped back from the microphone, not smiling but not retreating either. I caught a glance toward my parents. My mother's hands were folded in her lap. My father's jaw clenched, but his eyes didn't move. I expected nothing from them, and I needed even less. The moment wasn't about their approval. It was about reclaiming the space they never offered. As I exited the stage, someone touched my arm gently. "You said the thing only you could," they whispered. The echo of hands meeting lingered as I made my way down the steps. I kept my back to the stage stairs and moved on. My sister wasn't coming, and I didn't press for a reason. The Veterans Association had offered to host a small dinner after the ceremony, something informal, just to thank the speakers. Colonel Ray was there, chatting with the event organizer near the bar. A few others lingered by the entrance, sipping wine and making conversation in clusters. I waited by the host stand, still too aware of my own body, like my skin hadn't settled since I stepped off that stage. My parents arrived late. They didn't greet anyone. My father walked in first, a slight limp he refused to acknowledge shadowing his gait. My mother followed, clutching a slim leather purse, her expression carved from something cold and elegant. They asked to speak with me privately. I led them to a booth near the back, away from the noise. The candle on the table flickered against the glass divider beside us. No one spoke for several seconds. My father cleared his throat first. "You made your point," he said. "But did it have to be so public?" There was no apology. Just that. Mild irritation, neatly disguised as concern. His voice wasn't angry, but tight around the edges, like he'd rehearsed restraint. I kept my gaze steady. I served publicly. I broke privately. And I rebuilt without you. So yes, it had to be public. He turned aside, jaw tightening. The candlelight caught the side of his face, and I noticed for the first time how tired he looked. Not old, just worn. From what, I wasn't sure. It certainly wasn't carrying the weight of my story. My mother shifted in her seat, eyes glassy but dry. She pressed a napkin to her mouth and kept it there, like it might hold back something heavier than words. "You left," she whispered, not looking at me. "You always left. Even when you were here. We didn't know what to do with the silence. I started to answer and stopped. That wasn't what I expected her to say. "I didn't leave," I said slowly. "I just stopped coming to places where I wasn't seen." Her hands tightened around the napkin. "You didn't talk to us." "About any of it. You never asked," I replied. The line hit home. The space between us compressed, filled with everything that had never been said. All the years where the phone calls were polite and short. The birthdays remembered by gift cards. The holidays where I sat at the edge of every photo, or not at all. I used to sit in the driveway after visiting, I continued, just to breathe before going back in. because I didn't know how to be your daughter and still be myself. My father leaned forward slightly. We didn't know what you needed. You didn't try, I corrected, not cruelly, just truthfully. My mother looked up then. Her mascara had smudged slightly and she wasn't even trying to fix it. We were scared, she admitted. You came back different. And we didn't know how to handle you being so distant. I wasn't distant, I said. I was damaged. And you pretended I wasn't. That's not love. That's comfort at someone else's expense. She blinked, and a tear finally fell. Not for me. I didn't think it ever had been. Maybe for the version of her daughter she'd created in her head, the one who stayed home, married someone safe, kept the family name neat and easy. I didn't know how to reach you, she whispered. I exhaled, not angry, just emptied out. That's the difference between us, I said. I was always reachable. You just didn't want to hear the answers. We let the stillness run its course. Dishes clinked in the background. Someone laughed too loudly near the bar. Colonel Ray passed by our table, met my gaze, and gave a small, respectful nod. He didn't interrupt. He didn't need to. I looked back at my parents. My father's posture had softened. My mother wiped her cheek and folded the napkin in half, then again, like she was trying to make something messy look neat. Neither of them rose, so I pushed back my chair and stepped away from the table. I eased back into a seat across from my parents. The plates had been pushed aside and the coffee cups between us had gone cold. My mother kept glancing toward the kitchen, as if hoping someone would arrive to end the discomfort, while my father's fingers drummed lightly on the polished wood. Around us, the restaurant was emptying like a tide retreating. Dishes cleared, chairs tucked in, the low hum of the dishwasher carrying from the back. I took the seat across from my parents. We hadn't spoken in minutes. Our plates had been pushed aside, and the coffee cups between us had gone cold. My mother kept glancing toward the kitchen, as if hoping someone would arrive to end the discomfort, while my father's fingers drummed lightly on the polished wood. I drew an envelope from my bag. It was thick, slightly creased from travel, but still intact. The government seal in the top corner caught the flicker of the overhead lights. I set it in the center of the table. My father looked at it the way one might look at a stranger knocking on the door late at night, suspicious, alert, uninterested in opening up. That's a copy of the letter I got from the National Veterans Recovery Initiative, I said, keeping my tone even. It's formal, stamped, signed. They want me to represent the region in a national outreach program for returning veterans. My mother blinked at the envelope. My father said nothing. I steadied myself and folded my hands in my lap. They've seen my full file. The discharge, the commendations, the medical records, the things no one in this family ever asked about, they offered no reaction. I'm not showing you this to make you proud, I added. I'm showing you so you understand. I'm not your embarrassment. I never was. My father's eyes narrowed, but he didn't reach for the letter. Instead, he shifted back in his seat slightly, fingers curling against the tabletop. You don't get to erase me, I said. Not anymore. The words stayed between us like residue. He dropped his gaze and brought it back to mine. I didn't say you were. You didn't have to, I replied. The seating charts, the photos, the speeches without my name, the missing birthday calls, the silence said it. My mother worked her napkin into sharp corners. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came. You left, she said at last, voice soft, brittle around the edges. You were always leaving. I exhaled slowly. I left because I couldn't breathe here. We didn't know how to help you, she whispered. You didn't try, I said. Not loud, not cruel, just honest. Across from me, my father's hand finally moved toward the envelope. He touched the edge of it with 2 fingers, then paused, as if the weight of it was heavier than he expected. He pushed it an inch closer to himself, then hesitated. Before he could do anything more, someone stepped forward from the shadows. Colonel Ray. He had arrived a few minutes earlier, quietly, at my invitation. He hadn't interrupted, hadn't hovered, just stood a respectful distance away, observing the entire exchange with the same calm intensity I remembered from the cafe. Now he approached the table. Without a word, he picked up the envelope, turned it in his hand, and then set it directly in front of my father. "You should read it," he said, steady and without accusation. "Not for her. For yourself." The silence that followed wasn't tense. It was deliberate, like a page waiting to be turned. My father didn't answer, but he didn't push the envelope away either. He left it there, his hand resting beside it, the corners of his mouth tightening just slightly, as if he might say something but didn't yet know what. Ray gave me a quiet nod, then stepped back again, letting the moment breathe. My mother stared at the letter for a long time before reaching for her water, her hand trembling just enough to make the glass rattle against the coaster. She didn't sip, just held it there, as if unsure what she needed more, hydration or escape. I rose. Neither of them moved. On my way to the door, I gave the table one last look, not to see if they followed, but to catch a final glimpse of the envelope on the table. My father's hand now rested on top of it. He hadn't opened it, but he wasn't pushing it away either. Outside, the night air pressed gently against my skin, cool and alive. The street lamps buzzed overhead, and the faint scent of salt and exhaust mixed in the breeze. I exhaled, not in relief, but in release. There would be no applause here, no fanfare, just footsteps into the dark, carrying everything I didn't need them to hold anymore. No calls came after the dinner, not that night and not the next morning, not even when my name made it into the local paper under the headline, "Veteran Speech Moves a City to Silence." I knew better than to expect praise from people who never offered it. 3 days later, I came home to a brown cardboard box waiting on my front step. It wasn't heavy, just bulky enough that I had to balance it on my hip while unlocking the door. There was no return address, but the handwriting on the label was unmistakable. My mother's. I dropped my keys, kicked off my shoes, and set the box on the kitchen counter. It sat there like a challenge. I didn't touch it for hours, but eventually I opened it, not quickly and not cautiously, but deliberately. Inside, there were no notes or letters, only things. A cardigan I'd forgotten in their guest room closet, still faintly scented with lavender sachets. A leather-bound photo album, corners worn smooth, a few old academic certificates I'd assumed had been tossed years ago, my military medal, the one I thought had vanished. At the bottom, tucked into a plain white envelope, was a typed list. No salutation, no signature, just updated estate contact list, revised emergency authorization, current will and beneficiary notes. My name wasn't on it. I felt neither anger nor disbelief, only a strange calm that settled over me like fog, cool and quiet. They weren't punishing me. They were completing a transaction, cleaning out a file folder, updating a spreadsheet. I stood there, hands braced on the edge of the counter, and saw it all clearly for the first time. They had written me out long ago, in their photos, in their guest lists, in the stories they told at parties and holiday dinners. The paper trail only confirmed what the emotional one had been saying for years. Now, it had been made official. I slid the envelope into the shredder in the hallway. It disappeared with a steady hiss, strip by strip. Not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. I wasn't going to catalog my own erasure. The sweater went into a donation bag. The medals into the back of a drawer I rarely opened. I kept the photo album, not because I needed it, but because it was evidence. I had been there, at one point, in one version of our family's myth. I didn't call them. I didn't write back. There was nothing left that needed clarifying. That weekend, I drove to a secondhand furniture shop off the highway and bought a dining table, not because I needed it, but because I finally wanted one. It was dark wood, heavy and scarred in places, solid in a way my family never had been. 4 chairs stood around the table. I placed one on each side, not for symmetry, but for possibility. One for me. The others for whoever might sit across someday and listen without suspicion, without rewriting me into something easier. I cooked that night simple pasta with roasted vegetables, and I ate by myself without feeling lonely. And when I sat, I didn't leave space for ghosts. I didn't imagine a knock at the door or an overdue apology. I didn't leave a plate untouched or check my phone between bites. They had spoken clearly. And now, finally, so had I. The quiet no longer ached the way it used to. It didn't hover, it didn't echo. It simply existed, like furniture, like light, like breath. There was no triumph in it, no cinematic swell, just space. I thought of all the times I had shrunk myself to keep the peace, biting my tongue through conversations that erased me, swallowing pain so others could stay comfortable. I had played the quiet daughter, the soldier without scars, the woman without needs. That version of me didn't live here anymore. What came after wasn't revenge. It wasn't even justice. It was just space. Space to grow without defending. Space to live without shrinking. Space to love without needing permission. And in that space, for the first time in years, the weight lifted. I cleared my plate, rinsed it clean, and turned off the light above the table. The room went quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. I left the chairs where they were and headed down the hall, the floor cool under my feet. The next morning, an envelope sat on the counter. The wedding invitation I hadn't answered. Cream-colored, embossed, Charlotte's name in elegant cursive. Mine printed in block letters, like I was a distant guest. I slid it aside and laced up my boots instead. I was going hiking. The invitation had arrived in a cream envelope, thick and embossed, Charlotte's name written in sweeping cursive. Mine appeared in generic block print, like I was a distant guest instead of the sister of the bride. There was no personal note or call, only a line requesting RSVP by the 14th and a checkbox asking if I preferred chicken or vegetarian. I didn't check either. On the day of the wedding, I went hiking. It wasn't for symbolism or rebellion. I wanted to move my body, to climb, to sweat, to feel the earth steady beneath my feet, to remind myself I belonged to something wider than bloodlines and carefully arranged seating charts. The trail twisted through tall pines and rust-colored cliffs. Dust clung to my boots. By mile 3, my lungs worked hard and clean. It wasn't the strained, shallow breath of family dinners, the kind you hold like a secret. This was breath with purpose, with clarity. At the summit, I sat on a rock, unwrapped a peanut butter sandwich, and watched a hawk spiral slow circles over the valley. The stillness carried my heartbeat back to me. Not fast, just sure. I imagined Charlotte walking down the aisle, veil pinned perfectly, our parents misty-eyed, clutching tissues, the perfect frame, no empty space beside her. Let them pretend, crop the photos and print stories where I never existed. I no longer needed a seat in their fiction. That night, back at the Airbnb, I noticed a missed call, a voicemail from my aunt. Her tone was chipper, too practiced. "Hey, just wanted to say, we missed you today." It was a beautiful ceremony. Hope everything's okay. I deleted it. Later, a forwarded photo came through from someone I barely knew. Charlotte and her husband under a golden arch, the sunset soft behind them. My parents on either side, smiling, framed perfectly, balanced, complete. There was no empty gap, no implied omission, and that used to destroy me. Now it simply confirmed what I already knew. The most powerful thing I'd ever done was leave without fanfare and never ask to be let back in. I brewed tea, read half a novel, and slept with the window open and the door unlocked. No one knocked, and that was the point. I didn't wish for reconciliation anymore. I didn't draft monologues in my head or hope for accidental reunions. I didn't crave healing. I craved truth, and I had that now. In the morning, I packed slowly and set everything in neat stacks. No rush, no exit disguised as escape, just a quiet departure I didn't owe anyone an explanation for. The mirror near the door caught my reflection. Sun-browned skin, clear eyes, a woman who no longer shaped herself to fit others' comfort. I smiled, not because everything had been made right, but because I'd stopped trying to make it so. I left the keys on the table. I locked the door behind me and walked away without waiting for someone to say goodbye. Some people will never say sorry. Some families will rewrite the story to keep things neat, even if it means erasing you in the process. And maybe the hardest part isn't walking away. It's realizing you don't need to be invited back in. What about you? Have you ever had to choose distance over disappointment? If this story resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe. There's more where this came from.